is a rather violent and bloody game. If you're not comfortable with seeing that, you probably shouldn't watch this video. Video games can be a lot of different things. I know this is a painfully obvious statement, but bear with me here. They're a form of artistic expression, a medium that can be molded, or I suppose coded, into a theoretically infinite number of forms. They can provide experiences that no other art form can, and through that provide a unique breadth of responses and emotions in the player. I adore video games for this and many other reasons, and recently I've discovered a new experience, a new transcendent feeling. Murdering the shit out of stuff as a gigantic mutated shark is really fucking fun! I'm Kalice, and I recommend Maneater. A couple of details and FYIs to get out of the way before the slaughter can really begin. This game was made by Tripewire, probably most known for the Killing Floor series. I've played the first one casually, and I had fun with it for a while, but it never really gripped me, which for me is a fairly typical reaction when something doesn't have a proper narrative to it. This game won a poll over on my Patreon, so thank you to everyone who voted on that, and maybe go take a look-see at my Patreon if you'd like to be involved in future polls. I try to do one every few months. Also, there's a potential sticking point that I should address early. As of the writing of this script, on PC, Maneater is one of the many timed exclusives on the Epic Game Store. Personally, I just go where the games I want to play are, but if you want to wait for the Steam version, that will happen eventually. There's no specific release date at the moment, which is unfortunate. It's also on Sony and Microsoft's currently supported consoles. So you have options if you want to play it now, but do not want to deal with the Epic Store, which I can't blame you for. So as for the actual game, the framing of the narrative is that of a reality TV show following the exploits of shark hunters, one shark hunter in particular, while also narrating the actions of our protagonistic shark. The very first thing we see, after the main menu of course, is a small boat called the Cajun Queen. On it, two people are dragging a dead shark on board. One of these is Scaly Pete, who gives a monologue about how he's super into murdering sharks. Bit of a jerk, that one, but at least he's passionate, I suppose? Nah, but actually, fuck that, fuck him, sharks did nothing wrong. He soon gets word that a particular shark is nearby and heads off to kill her. Immediately after this, with our narrator snarkily commenting on our actions, the tutorial begins. You control a bull shark, and after getting a bit of a grip on how to handle her, the first battle against shark hunters begins. A fairly moderate amount of slaughter occurs, then Scaly Pete himself shows up, and in cutscene, we're summarily defeated and captured. Now aboard the Cajun Queen, the unnamed bull shark is strung up and tortured. Shortly before killing her, Scaly Pete discovers that she's pregnant. He carves the baby shark out of her mother's womb and marks her so he can track her down to kill later. On pure instinct, the baby shark lashes out and bites off his hand, acquiring a taste for human flesh in the process. This motherless baby shark is our real player character, and with that actually heartbreaking intro wrapped up, the stage is now set for an epic conflict of man versus beast. Scaly Pete has a personal hatred for this shark that took his hand. I personally want revenge for him killing my shark mom. Oh, and I'm sure the baby shark does too. As we control that baby shark, we'll need to help her devour all sorts of prey to grow in power and size so she can survive and get her revenge. As a side note, I really appreciate that the shark we play as is a lady shark. I know it's a bit weird, but it does personally add to the experience for me. So before we get too far along here, I should probably admit a bit of a bias. Full disclosure, I absolutely love sharks. They're probably my second favorite animal after snakes. They're adorable and definitely not monsters in real life. Generally speaking, as long as you don't do something to antagonize a shark or a sad accident occurs, they're not gonna do anything to hurt you. But I also love hyperviolence in monsters, and the shark in Maneater is definitely a monster, and this is definitely a gloriously bloody experience. The narrative is fairly threadbare. We check back in on Pete and his son Kyle as we progress through the game, and there's extra bits of dialogue from them sprinkled throughout the entire experience, specifically after you finish certain objectives, which we'll go more in depth on later on, of course. As arguably sparse as the story is, what's here I found to be really enjoyable. Despite his early characterization, Pete is presented as a genuinely complex and multi-layered character. He's not just a shark-hating piece of shit, and he's not just a stereotype. Obviously, I won't go into all of the details. I'll just say that I really wasn't expecting to feel strong emotions from the dumb, crazily over-the-top shark game, but I almost teared up multiple times, which was a welcome surprise. Outside of the main narrative beats, there's a lot of usually clever comedy. I found almost all of it to be funny, which was a relief. Not only because laughter is a dose of serotonin that my brain desperately craves, but because a large chunk of adult comedy is often off-putting to me. For example, I don't tend to look twice at most cartoons aimed at an older Western audience, unless someone whose opinion I trust ensures me that there's something there that I'd possibly enjoy. Many of them tend to be constantly needlessly crass, and that's just kind of it. I'm willing to put up with things being somewhat crass as long as the entire joke isn't just that something is gross or lewd. Comedy can be clever and gross. If memory serves me well, and it has been quite a while for some of these, Billy and Mandy and Flapjack as well as Rick and Morty are shows that manage to be both. But if you'll notice, 2 of those shows were marketed towards children. The other major problem is that very often the comedians, and I use that term loosely, writing these think that being offensive is synonymous with being funny. There's a difference between challenging social norms while cleverly dissecting aspects of society in a way that's enjoyable to hear, and being racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, or just needlessly cruel to people who simply don't deserve it. To put this in more concrete terms, don't expect me to ever talk about South Park in a positive light unless there's a rather massive shift in the philosophy and politics that the show regularly amplifies and reinforces. Maneater obviously isn't a cartoon, but I was worried that the comedy would fall into the same mediocre trash bin, meaning that it would be something that I had to put up with rather than enjoy. Instead, I was chuckling to myself throughout the experience. There were only 1 or 2 jokes that I recall even partially rubbing me the wrong way, but the game still regularly addressed more mature topics. Most of the comedy in Maneater comes by the way of Chris Parnell. He voices the narrator and does an excellent job as always. His biting sarcasm and on-the-nose delivery perfectly maintains the twisted reality TV tone throughout the experience. Actually, I don't really watch the shows this is mocking, so maybe this is just how those are? From comments on the bloody violence taking place,
this latest cycle of attacks will certainly be among the most infamous chapters in the long, troubled history of human-shark relations.
to on-point social commentary.
There would have been more protests surrounding Prosperity Sands were not the public already so numbed about ecological concerns in general.
To certain oddities.
Even the self-driving technology of Gazorpazorp is not without its reliability concerns.
Lines from him will play as you complete objectives, as well as a pool of random lines that can comment on what you happen to be slaughtering, as well as the areas that you happen to be in. It reminds me of how Bastion had a narrator constantly commenting on your actions. Over time, the narrator can become a character in their own right, and it's a very effective method of consistently reinforcing the narrative and tone throughout the moment-to-moment gameplay. I've enjoyed this kind of thing literally every single time I've encountered it in a game, and it's something I'd love to see more of. In case you haven't picked up on this, I love feeling like what I'm doing in a game matters in some way. Context is queen, and a narrator constantly provides that.
Dismantling the patriarchy bit by bit you are.
Oh yeah, totally. That's gonna be the killing blow, right there. Context is queen. That phrase is gonna pick up and just that's it. That's the nail in the coffin. Patriarchy's done. I did it. Thank you. Good night. Nah, it's just, I don't know. I just wanted to do it. Because I could. I just generally feel like the game is on my wavelength. The creatives behind this like a lot of the things I like, and have now themselves made one of those things. For example, the references they go for Easter eggs are almost all things that I fucking love. The word kaiju is said at some point, which is an absolute rarity in media that isn't explicitly about kaiju, especially in the West. I generally don't click with things as quickly or as deeply as I did with Maneater. I was kind of hoping that Carrion would be a bit closer in tone to Maneater. I still very much enjoyed that game for what it was, but I definitely loved Maneater a lot more. It's self-aware, it knows how inherently silly the core concept is, and embraces that silliness while still managing to tell a genuinely moving story. And this isn't just like a writing thing, it's also evident throughout the gameplay. So obviously you play as a shark. She doesn't have a name, but I love her. I'm going to call her Samantha in this video because I think that feels more personal than just calling her the shark over and over and over. This game pretty much let me do anything and everything I would expect a shark game to let me do, and then some. The controls just feel right for playing as a shark. Not that I really know what being a shark feels like, but I have been in the ocean before. So that's basically the same thing, right? There are two primary states that our girl Samantha can be in: underwater and near the surface of the water. While underwater, the left stick lets you move around on the horizontal plane, while the right stick allows you to control the camera. If you move the camera vertically, then the shark's angle changes, which changes the horizontal plane you can move around in. That plane is always in reference to the shark. This felt a bit strange at first. Most games don't allow this much freedom of movement. It's sort of similar to some space or flight games, but in those games you typically either always move forward or have an accelerator input of some kind. From my personal experience, it felt unique. Once it clicked, it felt absolutely amazing. I was able to move around exactly how I wanted to in any possible direction. I'm not sure if you knew, but sharks tend to be pretty decent swimmers, so this level of control felt right. It felt powerful. This game's a shark-based power fantasy, and I fucking love it. You can speed up by holding the left trigger. It's more of a dash than a sprint, so you sort of have to rhythm out your presses if you want to go as fast as possible, at least while underwater. You have a button to move downward and a button to move up. If you're near enough to the surface, then moving up will cause you to jump above the waves. Unless you immediately dive back down, Samantha will now, shockingly, be near the surface of the water. This is called knifing, presumably because the fin poking out of the water resembles a knife. This is a much more wholesome association for the word knifing than some people might have, and with my newfound obsession with this game, this meaning has absolutely taken precedence in my mind. It's kind of like how when I think about the names of the planets, the Sailor Scouts come to mind before the actual planets themselves. I feel no guilt nor remorse for this, part of that whole embracing my mind's strange intricacies thing. In the knifing state, controls are mostly the same, but you move a bit faster. The ascend button now causes Samantha to jump, while the descend button, or angling our adorable shark downward while in the air, causes her to dive back beneath the waves into the underwater state. The biggest change is that moving the right stick vertically doesn't change the camera at all. While on the surface, it doesn't do anything, and while in the air, it simply tilts Samantha in a different direction, which can help with targeting specific enemies, and meaning that going back below the water is always a conscious choice. If this weren't the case, everything on the surface, including combat, would feel a bit too slippery. Whereas with this in place, you can dodge around near the surface without the game suddenly launching you back underwater. You can dash in the air after a jump by either pressing the jump button again or pushing the speed up button. Eventually you get two of these, which looks entirely absurd. Not really a negative in my book, and it's fun to use, so if that is a trade-off, I think it's one that's worth it. Maybe if there's ever a sequel, we can get dash cancels, start edging the shark action game closer and closer to character action. It's the standard all action game should strive for, but that's a soapbox for another video. You can go on to land, which definitely makes you feel slower and weaker than in the water, because of course it fucking does, but you can still jump and dash and eat in this state, and there are certain collectibles puzzles and objectives that require you to briefly go onto land. You also have an oxygen gauge. If that runs out, you start rapidly taking damage until Samantha's gills are in water again. If you get decent at flailing, jumping, and dashing, you can force Samantha to hold her breath and take a shortcut over land. Shifting between the two water-based states is simple and easy, or you can get a bit fancier. You can get speed and air by doing the dash from underwater towards the surface, causing you to shoot up towards the sky. Conversely, diving from the air down into the water gets you moving quickly towards the mysterious depths. The similar controls between the two states meant that I never found the shift jarring. In addition to emulating the movements of a shark, this system also adds a layer of complexity and control to the combat system. Controls just feeling good moment to moment is one of the most important things an action game can get right as far as I'm concerned. The first half of that is how you move, the second half of that is how you fight. Your primary method of attack is, of course, biting. You can slam on the right trigger repeatedly to rapidly bite. I'd call this a shark combo, but that's not strictly true. That or Sea Life just has easy access to a stupid amount of Roman cancels. Listen, if you actually understood that joke, I appreciate you. Basically, if you do a bite chain, Sea Life always has the chance to dodge out of the way between bites. Your bites have homing towards the nearest target, assuming you're fairly close to them. If you instead hold the bite button, and whatever you're biting is smaller than you, or in a particularly vulnerable state, then you enter a thrashing state where you can wiggle the right stick back and forth to deal big damage. It's sort of like a grapple, if you'll forgive the continued fighting game comparisons. Unlike a fighting game, you can be dealing with multiple enemies in this game, so this is a very strong damage option when you can take it, but it greatly reduces your mobility, you can't use the camera, and you can't dodge. You can drop that soon-to-be meal whenever you want by letting go of the trigger, but it definitely greatly increases the chances that you'll take a hit from something and overall slows your momentum down. All of the biting stuff feels fucking great, which is good because shoving various things into her toothy maw is a huge chunk of what our noble shark does throughout her revenge-based quest. You can also perform a tail whip once you reach a certain size that lets you knock enemies away, or if you're holding something or someone in your mouth, this turns them into a projectile. Shark-propelled explosives are something to be feared. As for defensive options, other than just swimming the fuck away from conflict, you can dodge, avoiding damage from those pesky human firearms, or opening up Sea Life to a counterattack. The dodge isn't just free invulnerability, the direction of the dodge matters. There may be some iframes for bullets, I'm honestly not entirely sure, but if you dodge from the path of an alligator's charge into the path of that alligator's charge, the charge is going to hit you. Sounds like common sense, but you know, video games are fucking weird sometimes. Being thrashed around by a larger predator is a fucking terrifying experience every single time. Like, I know nature can be terrifying, but I genuinely felt like I was playing a horror game in some of the early areas and endgame areas. Ugh. Consuming anything, threat or prey, restores health. A brief tactical retreat to heal by munching on some smaller fish can sometimes be what prevents you from ending up fish food yourself. You can also just full-on run away from everything other than main story boss fights if you think you're too far out of your depth, or really just don't want to deal with a particularly tenacious alligator at that moment. It's not exactly a combat ability specifically, but you have sonar, which is sort of like a brief ping of Arkham-esque detective vision that highlights nearby life and collectibles, which marks them on your map, which is amazing. Since it's a button you have to push instead of a mode you enter, it also solves the problem of that just being objectively better than the normal view in all ways but visual, meaning that you don't need to feel compelled to permanently replace your normal vision with the special video game vision. On that note, the game is really pretty and colorful to look at. We're safely out of the everything is fucking gray era of gaming, but it's still nice to be playing something that's just pleasant to look at. Combine that with the fact that every animation in the game is so satisfying, and the visuals of the game very much stick in my mind. Hands down, my favorite animation is the one of our heroic shark devouring something while swimming along the surface of the water. It's just so satisfyingly crunchy. Finally, for basic combat options, there's a sort of soft lock-on system that rapidly moves the camera towards the nearest enemy, which helps immensely if they're off-screen. I remember hearing around release that a lot of people had problems with the locking system, but I personally didn't. The gist of the complaints seemed focused on how when you're dealing with multiple enemies, especially underwater, it can be difficult to choose a specific target and take them out. While I definitely understand where they're coming from, I have two big reasons that I disagree with the complaints. One, sharks aren't meant to be tactically minded. In this specific case, you're supposed to be playing an angry killing machine, not strategically picking targets. Of course, a shark is going to prioritize whatever target is closest to it. Generally, you can even afford to tank a few hits if it'll mean both removing a threat and getting a nice little snack that will restore health. Everything about the design of the combat incentivizes attack over defense. You can't always be aggressive, but if there's ever a choice between going absolutely berserk and tearing shit apart, or being more pragmatic and defensive, the Bloodborne full aggro approach is probably the best one. I bet Professor Layton's Luke would like this game. Or maybe not. There are a lot of dead animals in it. This soft lock-on is meant to let you address whatever threat is most immediate, and if you don't want to do that, you don't have to. It's just slightly harder to go against instinct. This makes dealing with multiple enemies a challenge that feels distinct from other action games. I had fun with the process. That said, I don't generally agree with the controls are bad on purpose defense if that's the only part of the rationale. As you can probably guess by me even bringing that up, I do have more to say on the subject. Quite simply, I don't think the controls are bad. I just think other games have conditioned a lot of gamers to rely heavily on lock-ons. You move very fast in this game, especially if you build for it, which I'll explain more in a bit. And you have a lot of control over both that movement and the camera, unless you're either on land, which you really shouldn't be for combat, or in the horrifying jaw of a rival predator, which is your punishment for taking a big hit from something fucking bigger than you. Whenever I wanted to ignore the nearest threat and take on something further away, I didn't have any trouble doing so. I just relied on the movement to get me where I wanted to be, and the camera to keep any particularly large threats that could charge at me in view. Obviously, if you don't ever get comfortable with those things, then that's not really an option, but that's true of any game that has any degree of challenge. So while it is an accurate statement, I just don't think it's a particularly valuable one for the conversation. Or maybe I'm an outlier and just weirdly good at this game, I honestly have no idea. Broadly speaking, there are two types of enemies, and at this point you can probably guess the categories they'll fall into: humans and sea life. For the humans, there's a GTA-esque simplistic alarm system. There's a few intricacies that I'll explain before our time is through, but basically, if you attack or eat humans, shark hunters will definitely come after you. Can't believe they're so upset about Samantha just wanting a snack. Gosh. At any rate, shark hunters are usually on the surface of the water in varying types of boats. But there are some divers and other methods employed, so you can't just head underwater to safety without working for it, at least a bit. Humans are fairly squishy if you can actually grab them off of their boats, but this requires launching yourself at the correct angle and possibly exposing yourself to enemy fire while you're up in the air or on the ships. And as you progress through the game, they're protected by larger and larger boats that are either harder to get on or have the creative application of technology to prevent certain methods of attack. If you're feeling frisky or have grown Samantha into a particularly large shark, you can also opt to just destroy the ships rather than trying to pick the humans off of them one by one. This process is stupidly enjoyable. So is pretty much everything in this game, but this really made me feel fucking unstoppable once I got near the end of the game and could pull it off consistently. Meanwhile, the ocean's depths contain all manner of very hungry and aggressive creatures that will snap at you with any chance they get. Generally, they have a similar moveset to you: bites, dodges, and tail whips, as well as the ability to swim towards you very quickly with their mouth open. Speed, tactics, and numbers vary species to species, or location to location. After one alligator ceases to be too much of a threat, expect to start encountering 3 or 4 at a time. These two broad enemy types keep things interesting moment to moment, and there are also boss battles for further variety. Most of the human bosses are rather simplistic and represent the introduction of a new type of ship or mechanic that shark hunters will use against Samantha going forward. Whereas undersea boss battles against apex predators feel much more like tests of your mastery of the combat system. They're like other sea predators, but more aggressive, tankier, and they tend to hit harder. Plus, they have unique appearances, which is cool. The human bosses do too, but that's much less cool in my opinion. Their lore is neat though. I will say that Scaly Pete himself is a boss battle against a human that I would put onto the level of the apex predator fights. I think it's about time to explain some of the crazier things you've been seeing throughout this video. There are numbers and levels because this is actually an action RPG. It's both more and less complicated than you might guess. There are 4 resources you can collect by either devouring things or completing various objectives. Those would be protein, fat, minerals, and mutagen. Protein, fat, and minerals are generally easy to obtain. Just head out into the world and complete pretty much any objective or hunt down prey that yields the particular resource that you want. Mutagen is just a touch rarer. Oh, poor language there, sorry. You probably don't want to touch it. Definitely don't touch the mutagen. Certain rarer mutated aquatic creatures can grant it, as well as one of the collectible types. Acquiring any of these resources adds to an EXP total, get enough experience, and you level up. Every level has Samantha grow at least a little bit, but certain level thresholds turn her into a larger tier of shark. This requires going back to one of the grottos you've discovered, as well as reaching a certain point in the story. Reaching new shark tiers tends to come with a larger increase in stats, the occasional new ability like additional air dashes, and allows you to progress to certain areas in the pseudo-open world by destroying larger and larger grates. Oh, and grottos are sort of safe areas that you can fast travel to, reach new shark-sized tiers at, like I said, and spend those resources on upgrading various shark parts that grant abilities. Vocalizing it does feel a bit strange, but yes! There are various shark parts, or evolutions, that you can equip to Samantha to modify her ability set. Most of the absolutely crazy, possibly magical looking footage you've seen throughout this video can be attributed to this system. You can unlock a variety of upgrade parts for the shark by completing various objectives, many of which change our girl Samantha's appearance. As important as accessorizing is for a fashion-conscious shark always on the hunt for her next meal, these also give a variety of interesting and powerful abilities, so they're super fucking worthwhile. Primary upgrades tend to change existing abilities, letting your tail whip fire out a poison projectile, allowing your bite to stun enemies, just making it much easier to eviscerate boats by just ramming into them, your dodge turning you into lightning. Fuck me, this game is so fucking cool. The body pieces of each set are unique in that almost all of them have special activatable abilities that essentially allow you to enter a temporary super state. All of these are really fun and maybe a bit busted. You can mix and match your upgrades however you'd like to, but there are bonuses for equipping more pieces of a single set, and they tend to look better together. These various evolutionary paths that you can unevolve from at literally any time, which isn't at all how evolution works, but whatever, we're far past that in video games, are primarily broken down into 3 sets. There's the bioelectric set, which gives Samantha lightning powers and kind of makes her look a bit jellyfishy. If you don't want to play a video game where you can be a fucking lightning shark, I simply don't understand your taste in games. Gameplay-wise, this allows you to stun enemies if you hit them with enough lightning stuff, which is most effective on sea life. The body ability basically just shoots lightning out of you in all directions and makes it look awesome to do pretty much everything. The bone set is definitely my favorite visually. Samantha looks like an absolute monstrosity with this set. Just fucking look at it! It's like her bones are growing out of and over her body. It's so cool! And I can't think of anything quite like it from literally any fictional anything I've ever encountered, except for that one dude from Naruto, but he doesn't look anywhere near as awesome as this, so points for originality and coolness too. It's effective at destroying ships, thrashing enemies, and tanking hits. Simple, direct, and fun. This one's most useful against humans, and the body ability makes it even easier to destroy ships. You absolutely shred through them once you fully upgraded the bone body, which never stops feeling incredible. finally, there's the Shadow set, which makes our shark look like a fucking stealth bomber. Yeah, okay, fair. This is pretty cool too. This set's all about mobility and poisoning enemies. It's a bit of an all-rounder. Speed is a strong option if you're confident in your mobility, but it's arguably not as strong against either particular set of enemies, as Bioelectric is on fish or Bone is on humans. The body ability slows down everything around Samantha. I found myself generally favoring this set unless I was pulling out one of the other ones for a specific purpose, because the speed difference is just so wide, and I guess I just never really stopped being a Sonic fan. All of these major sets can radically alter your playstyle, but there are also smaller upgrades that give more generalized advantages, usually passives of some kind. There's a body that isn't part of any set that you probably saw me using for almost all of this footage, the Tiger Shark body. This increases your resource gain. I wanted to upgrade everything, so I used this for quite a while in the hopes that it would mean that I wouldn't need to grind at all. I didn't need to, so the plan wound up working. This meant that at endgame, I could switch between all of the max upgraded sets at my leisure. I did so, and playing around with that wide range of very powerful abilities was really fun. The Tiger Shark body is, so far, the only piece of DLC. It was free, and something that is likely more substantial and probably not free is on the way. All of the other upgrades aren't visible. They're internal organs. You can equip up to 3 at a time. They're all passive abilities. The sonar upgrade helped massively with tracking down collectibles to the point that I never needed to use a guide to hit 100%. All of the resource types have a related organ that increases how much you get when you collect any of that resource. I, of course, use these for the majority of my playthrough because I'm me. Other than those, there's stuff that lets you slightly tweak or complement your playstyle, like making yourself faster, letting you stay on land for longer, and giving you more health, stuff like that. Every single shark part in the game has 5 tiers of upgrades. The 3 normal resources are used roughly the same amount throughout. Mutagen is much rarer, because of course it is, and you don't need nearly as much, but it is required for upgrading to tier 4 and 5 on everything. This is likely meant to indicate that Samantha is evolving beyond natural capabilities, which I think is a really neat touch that naturally integrates itself into the gameplay. After doing all of the content, I was left with a lot of all of the resources to spare. If you only want to upgrade a few of the shark parts, you should have more than enough to get what you need without constantly using the drop enhancing equips like I did. The main story, as I said, is expressed primarily through watching a few cutscenes involving Scaly Pete and Kyle as the hunt for Samantha grows more intense and personal. Basically, each new area involves you needing to complete a certain list of objectives before you can trigger the cutscene or boss fight, which then opens up some new objectives to complete in the next area, which will unlock the next story thing, and on and on and on until you hit credits. You can go to most areas early, but the objectives in those areas, aside from collectibles, won't be available until you progress to that point in the story. You definitely don't need to do everything to progress, far from it, but at the same time, it doesn't just let you beeline the main story. Along with a short list of required objectives, there's also usually a percentage of completion you have to hit for the area, which gives you some flexibility in what you want to go after, and certain areas are blocked off by needing to reach a certain growth tier, while each growth tier requires reaching a certain point of the story. Completing the required objectives in each area will also tend to unlock new, similar objectives in the area. Despite all of those areas being underwater, I genuinely thought that each of them had its own personality and feeling. Bayous, polluted waters, upper class areas, and open water all feel rather different. Throw in elaborate maze-like sewer systems and underwater caverns, and there's a surprising amount of variety. I likes it. As for the actual objectives in the game, there are 2 overall categories. Most of these objectives are just to kill specific things in specific areas. These usually have a bit of context. Your quest log will have cheeky descriptions for what you're doing, and upon completing many of them, a line of dialogue will play, usually from the narrator, Scaly Pete, or Kyle. Sometimes from another major shark hunter you can take on, or some character somehow related to the carnage Samantha is spreading in this particular instance. Scaly Pete and Kyle being featured in many of these was a small touch, but it served as additional characterization for the antagonist, as well as ensuring that the actual main conflict of the narrative was never too far from my mind. And again, I like the writing, so these little bits of dialogue definitely felt like more than enough of a reward for me to engage with the content. Plus, I was having so much fun with the moment-to-moment gameplay that I wanted to wring out every possible piece of content from the game that I could. If there was a higher difficulty or a New Game Plus mode with meaningful gameplay changes, I absolutely would have just rolled right into that after finishing the game, but I digress. The framing and context for the otherwise directionless slaughter is usually pretty strong. There's other sea creatures that you fight for dominance. I can't not ooh at that. Sorry, not sorry. The quests where you kill humans are generally framed as taking revenge on them for fucking with nature in some way, which, yeah, humans do that a lot, so fair enough. And killing large groups of sea creatures is done to lure out an apex predator. Those would be the sea life boss fights that I mentioned before, and they can be absolutely terrifying if you're not on level for them. I generally had fun with them, though one of them definitely wound up sort of stuck on land, which made it much less of a fight, and much more of a one-sided slaughter. Their designs are cute and unique, and they each get intros where they swim in and get narration over them, and it's cheesy, and I genuinely love it. For dealing with the apex predators, you get pieces of the bone set. The alarm system isn't really a quest, but I'm still going to talk about it here because it involves killing a bunch of things. It's sort of a mechanic system with rewards you can earn for engaging with it. Once you kill a few humans or destroy a few ships, shark hunters show up to try to ruin Samantha's fun. The alert status itself is simplistic. The shark hunters are either actively pursuing you, searching for you, or have given up the search and you're back to normal gameplay. But there's an infamy level that grows as you kill more and more shark hunters. Once you reach the threshold for the next level, a named shark hunter will appear, complete with a fun intro like the apexes. Successfully killing that shark hunter will give you resources, a new shark part, either a strong internal organ or pieces of the bioelectric set, and permanently raise your infamy level, which means higher level shark hunters with larger ships and more advanced techniques will come after you from that point forward. There's a push and pull to it. The rewards you get for gaining infamy are valuable, but raising that level means that anytime you're actively attacking humans, things are going to be more difficult for you. I tried to keep the shark hunters roughly near my level so they'd be a fun threat to contend with as I took out the less armed humans, but that I wouldn't just melt as soon as Samantha started craving the most dangerous game. Also, each of the named shark hunters have descriptions written in one of the menus basically stating how big of a deal they are and by comparison, how much of a threat Samantha has become. Apparently, Samantha became a big enough threat to draw the ire of a veteran of the Battle of Innsmouth. Feels good. Fuck. I love this fucking game. All of the other objectives are collectibles. There are 3 types. There's resource caches, which are always in the depths. They're a reliable means of acquiring mutagen, as well as a good source of all of the other resources. A small pool of lines play when you acquire these. I like these lines. I like almost all of the writing, comedic or otherwise, in this game, but there are far too few lines for how many resource caches there are spread throughout the game. This wasn't particularly annoying to me, but it was a bit of a bummer when I realized I had probably encountered all of the dialogue related to this objective and still had entire areas worth of them to go. License plates are collectibles that just kind of float in the environment. Many of them are on land or high up in the air, which can lead to interesting navigation or platforming challenges that the game otherwise wouldn't ask you to do. Many of these actually require you to come back once Samantha has grown up a bit. The more unique ones are fun to collect. Collecting these gives the 3 basic resources, but there's unfortunately no dialogue associated with collecting them. Finally, there's landmarks. These are easily my favorite collectible type. They give the 3 basic resources, of course, but what's important to me is that finding one will zoom in on an interesting visual or Easter egg, then someone, usually the narrator, will comment on whatever weird thing happens to be there. Be it an art installation, a particularly strange set of skeletons, or even something a bit more eldritch. These landmarks were plentiful, and that sprinkled unique dialogue and cute Easter eggs throughout the entire experience. Finding all of the landmarks in a section of the map usually rewards a piece of the shadow set. How you get each of the sets in relation to one another is interesting, actually. Exploring gives a generally good set, killing tough humans gives a set that's good on strong underwater enemies, killing the strongest underwater enemies gives a set that's really good for taking out humans. It encourages you to balance out which pieces of content you engage with, or makes you feel like you have an edge on the remaining content if you just push through and deal with a whole set of objectives at once. So the way that I played this game is that I upgraded the resource giving parts as much as possible, then sonar as much as I could as soon as I could, then proceeded to clear out as many objectives in each area as possible as I progressed through them, usually just going to whatever was closest to me until the area was either complete or I needed to become a bigger shark to get something. While all of the objectives are fairly simple and direct, the act of actually playing the game was so fun, and the writing throughout the entire experience was so clever, funny, and just resonated with me so much so that beat for beat, I was having an absolutely amazing time. I'm not sure if I've mentioned that I probably have ADHD. Being able to quickly switch between a variety of fun and usually brief objectives allowed me to indulge in those impulses and feel rewarded for doing so. The game also has a bit of collectathon energy, which is something I always appreciate. I hesitate to call it a member of the genre, but there's just a dash of it in there. Realistically, it's closer in structure to an open world game. It has all the strengths of that genre, but it's a concentrated and simplified experience, so it doesn't grow repetitive, monotonous, or otherwise unengaging over the length of its run. Personally, I couldn't really care less about the actual size of the open world of an open world game, but I do care about how much fun I'm having exploring that open world, so as far as I'm concerned, this game nails it. Bit of a side note, but the game is absolutely excellent about communicating where you should be looking for remaining collectibles, which I wish every game with collectibles did. There's a uniquely terrible feeling of realizing you're missing just a handful of a collectible type in, say, Assassin's Creed, and your only option to track down the remaining ones is to either scour the massive landscape for hours and hours and hours, or use a guide to basically check every single point in the game. That experience is terrible and not something you at all need to worry about if you are looking to complete this game. I personally don't tend to put much stock into game reviews as a whole. I tend to find a few reviewers that I know and understand the tastes of, so I can compare my opinions to their own in a way that will probably effectively let me know what things I should and shouldn't pay attention to. It's a bit of work at the start, but it saves me time in the long run. Regardless, this game seemed to get middling reviews overall, and having now played it, I genuinely can't understand why. It's delightful and hilarious and amazing and just really fucking fun to play. It's a big dumb shark game that I actually really enjoyed from beginning to end. It was ridiculous and over the top, and it wholeheartedly embraced it. I actually found myself getting emotionally invested. The complaints I had were few and far between. I could pull for another one here, like I guess the game could have been more challenging, but they aren't actually really much more than nitpicks. I just really loved my time with this game. I 100%ed it in about 13 hours, and my biggest problem is that I wanted more. Which isn't to say that the game felt at all incomplete, just that I had fun the whole way through. As of the writing of this script, there's apparently going to be a DLC announcement fairly soon. I really hope it's something substantial, like an expansion or mini-campaign. I'm late to the party here, and I'm under no delusion that my small to mid-sized channel has anything resembling the influence to actually get these things I'm about to talk about implemented into the game in any capacity, but some ideas for types of things I'd like to see that Tripewire or anyone else making a game like this are absolutely free to take inspiration from. I'm pretty sure they would be even if I didn't say that, but I want to make that clear because I want to play these things, damn it. Playing as a different shark or maybe even different sea creature in a different location is an idea. Then it can have its own entirely self-contained story, though that might mean effectively resetting the size progression, which could be a mixed bag depending on how it's handled unless you play like a whale and start fairly large. There could be new high difficulty areas that possibly come with a raised level cap. New Game Plus with some remixed content could be cool. or a higher difficulty. The themes that immediately jump to mind are Arctic, just because that's such a radically different environment from what's already in the game. The depths of the ocean could provide a lot of weird deep-sea creatures to go up against, and an Eldritch-themed expansion would be fucking perfect. Listen, there's a lot of Easter eggs already referencing Eldritch stuff, and it would mean fighting crazy insanity fish and maybe even an Eldritch god, and it would just be fucking cool! Infamous Festival of Blood and Red Dead Redemption Undead Nightmare are both spooky-themed campaigns for existing games that were super not canon at all, but really fun, unique, and engaging. I want more games to make content like that, canon or otherwise. Even if it doesn't go the Eldritch route, I would like to see more fantastical elements introduced. The player shark is really the most otherworldly thing in this game, aside from like Easter eggs. Going up against some mythological creatures of some kind would be really cool. At any rate, I definitely had an amazing time, and I'm absolutely going to be keeping an eye out for more single-player experiences from Tripewire, be they Maneater related or otherwise, because this game was so fucking fun! This has been Kalice. Thanks for watching. You can like the video, subscribe, or share this video around if you enjoyed it and want to. My Patreon exists if you'd like to support me. There's neat bonuses like access to my Discord server, and the ability to listen to hours and hours of raw recording sessions that are kinda sorta like podcasts, but also have a bunch of outtakes. So if that's your kind of thing, there you go. Fuck. Speaking of Patreon, big thanks to all of my current patrons like Lotta, Edith, and Sam, all of whom are really cool people. Keep loving what you love, and I'll see you next time with something else. Listen, I would absolutely love to see a kaiju game done in this style, either by Tripwire, because based on this I bet they could do it right, or by someone else. Most kaiju games are like pseudo-fighting games, sort of reminiscent of anime arena fighters, which are fun for a while, especially if they have substantial single-player, but I'd like to see this semi-open world, evolution-based, single-player focused style applied to a kaiju game. If one exists, absolutely point me in its direction, please.